I also want to note that the Sierra Buttes Trail Stewardship, it was created out of a desire to sustain a quality lifestyle in the Lost Sierra.
Welcome to Dirt Magic, a podcast chronicling the Sierra Buttes Trail Stewardship's mission of building sustainable recreation-based communities through stewardship, job creation, and world-class events, providing quality outdoor experiences through trail construction and maintenance in the Lost Sierra. I'm your host, Martin Scheel. Our show today features a panel discussion from the California Wildfire and Forest Resilience Task Force regional meeting in South Lake Tahoe. The meeting was attended by 800 in-person and virtual guests. SBTS's Michelle Abramson was a featured speaker on the Focus on Recreation panel, discussing how SBTS is promoting recreation and rural economic stimulation through our Connected Communities project. She also addressed the challenges with the post-wildfire recovery process, from restoring the trails to restoring communities, and how trails can bring back an economic resource in small communities, as well as future protection and resilience through our Fire Hardened Trails prescription. You will also hear from Stew McMorrow with Cal Fire and SBTS Executive Board Member about Fire Hardened Trails. And stay tuned for an upcoming episode as Stew joins SBTS Executive Director Greg Williams, taking a deeper dive into how the SBTS is working on our Fire Hardened Trail prescription program. Thanks for listening and enjoy the panel discussion.
Resilience with multiple benefits. And we're really proud of the fact that under this task force, there was essentially a recreation strategy that was developed by some of the panelists here, all focused on, how do we advance the core goal of this task force, wildfire resilience, but in a way that benefits both recreation and thriving economic development in our communities. So I'm so pleased to have Dana Stroud, who is a colleague of mine in the Newsom administration, who helps to lead the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, moderating this panel. So over to you, Dana.
All right. Thank you, Secretary Crowfoot. And I'm thrilled to be here and see so many familiar faces. Prior to joining the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, I was with the Sierra Nevada Conservancy for about 5.5 years. Shout out to my SNC colleagues that are here. Thank you. Hey there. So this is all familiar territory for us today. I want to provide a brief history of why we're here, and then we're going to get into a panel discussion about how to integrate recreation into some of the fuels work that everybody is doing out there. Most importantly, though, we're going to set a context for you around the economic value of the work that's being done, particularly to the communities that you all live in, that you work with, and that you are interfaced with every single day. We're going to talk about economics, and many of you probably don't realize that you are actually in the business of growing California's economy. So we're going to talk about that in just a moment. But first, I want to provide a brief history of how we got here today. As you know, in the middle of the pandemic back in 2020, Mammoth Lakes Trails and Public Access, or what we'll now refer to as MLTPA, sponsored and convened an advisory committee of some federal, state, and regional participants to produce what we called CalRec Vision, cross-jurisdictional collaboration to advance sustainable outdoor recreation in California. Long title, we get it, but the key point there was about the cross-jurisdictional collaboration. At that point in 2020, we were seeing just kind of some fractured efforts and a real desire to want to try and find better ways to collaborate between the federal and the state agencies that were dealing with the multitudes of visitors that were coming out to visit our natural resources and assets here in California. We don't need to go back to 2020, but you all know what it looked like back then. So this CalRec Vision was developed with federal, state, and local partners. We called it a white paper. We circulated among some colleagues. In the fall of 21, Patrick Wright reached out to the CalRec Vision Leadership, MLTPA, and asked if we could kind of reconvene this little advisory body that we had put together to take on the development of a joint strategy as defined in the Wildfire Task Force Action Plan with a focus on recreation. MLTPA broadened that original CalRec Vision Advisory Committee to include additional participants, local LA County parks. We had some NGOs. We had, again, our federal and state partners, including California State Parks, that were participating in that. Fortunately, we had two co-leads that took on the responsibility to kind of chair this committee. U.S. Forest Service, Jim Bacon. I'm not sure if Jim's in the room today, but Jim was that representative. And we had Angie Avery from Sierra Nevada Conservancy representing the state as our co-leads as we formed and moved forward with this key working group under the Wildfire Task Force. This group met monthly for over 16 months, and some of you who were in Grass Valley back in the fall of 22, you saw a brief presentation and an update on the work that had been done. We delivered this joint strategy in January of 23. We delivered it to the task force. We circulated among folks. As we were finishing it, we routed it to a variety of our recreation partners and stakeholders out there. Through our relationship and partnership with the Forest Service, we were able to route it to our tribal communities who are engaged in this. We routed it through our Recreate Responsibly coalition that meets on a monthly basis. We received several opportunities for feedback. We put it in front of communities that had been impacted by fire and were still experiencing those impacts of fire to get their feedback on what it meant to be a resilient a resilient community post-fire. So with all of that feedback and delivery to the task force, we're ready to go. We've got this joint strategy, and here we are. The thing that we forgot to do, the element that we forgot to consider and really lean into was the defined plan for implementing these key actions that were identified in this strategy. We handed it to the task force and said, here you go, we've done our job. The key working group has done its job, but we forgot about the implementation. So here we are today. We want to come together and talk a little bit about the work that is already being implemented using some of the key actions that were identified in this joint strategy for sustainable recreation and wildfire resilience here in California. Intentional or not, this joint strategy has kind of served as a guiding document for some of this work that we're going to talk about in a moment. But what we're really intending to do is move into a kind of a playbook formation so that we can take these ideas and these key actions and actually socialize them around the state to the other partners that are in the middle of recreation work, fuels management work, and our focus in trying to integrate. It's okay to integrate recreation projects into the fuels management work that you all are engaged in. So we want to talk a little bit about some of the techniques that are being used for such integration that way, and we'll get into those stories in just a moment. So what I'd really like to do first is start with an economic overview. Some of you may be familiar with the Bureau of Economic Analysis. It's coming out of the U.S. Department of Commerce. Back in 2016, they created the Outdoor Recreation Satellite Account, or what we now refer to as ORSA. And ORSA does an annual accounting of the impacts of the economy and outputs of the economy around the United States. They've got a multitude of these accounts that they calculate and drive data for every year. In particular, it was a big deal when this ORSA was created because now we were actually calculating the impact of outdoor recreation to the nation's economy as well as to states' economies. So what you see on the screen right now is the most recent data that came out of ORSA. It shows you, you probably can't see as well as we can, but the percentages of the GDP, the nation's GDP, that recreation contributes to the overall economy here in the United States. So let's just share with you 2.2% of the nation's GDP is driven by the outdoor recreation economy. And that equals about $563 billion in the United States. if we go to the next slide, and that's me, I'm driving, so let's go to the next slide. Wait, there you go. In California itself, we have a value added through the outdoor recreation economy of $73.8 billion, accounting for 2.0% of the state's GDP. Now, I want to note that this is based on 2022 data, because that's what's the most recent available from the BEA. In November of this year, they will release the 23 data. So they're always just not quite a year behind. I want to note that when we talk about value added, when we talk about this $73.8 billion value added to the state's GDP, what that accounts for is the gross output of an industry and their contribution to the GDP. So when you hear the term value added, that's what we're referring to. But in addition to the contribution to the state's GDP, recreation in California contributed over 565,000 jobs that were created in the state of California this is 2022 data. In addition to that, we had almost $35.2 million in compensation value to those 565,000 jobs. That compensation includes the wage and salary of the workforce that is employed within the recreation industry as ORSA defines it. So California ranks first in GDP. It ranks first in number of jobs created in outdoor recreation. It ranks first in the average compensation of the recreation. Across all 50 states, California is first. So just real quick, I want to share with you, here are some examples of what ORSA counts as recreation activities towards their accounting of the industry. It's things like boating, it's skiing, it's hiking, camping, RVing, skiing, as I mentioned, mountain biking. It's a variety of these activities, and all of these take place on many of the lands that you all are responsible for stewarding and managing. Real quick, this is a slide to show how California compares. This was the value added for the jobs created. Here's the employment numbers. You'll see a blue line and a dotted line. This is the trend that California aligns with the U.S. So we are right there leading and a part of what the U.S. Is doing in the outdoor recreation space in all the 50 states. California is right there. We are not lagging behind anything. We are, in fact, in the lead, and that's an important number to remember. I want to pivot just a moment, because we talk about recreation output, but there's also an industry that is driven by that recreation output, and that's our tourism industry. And in the state of California, tourism is a significant driver of our economic activities, particularly for many of the rural communities that you all engage with, the rural and forested communities. And in 23, Visit California provided their analysis, and we have reached $150 billion value added for the tourism industry in California. That equates to not quite 4% of the state's GDP. That number, 150 plus billion, takes us to pre-pandemic days, pre-pandemic 2019 days that were setting records. And here we are now recovering fully and exceeding what we were doing pre-pandemic. The reason that we share this is because tourism drives so many of these local economies. Tourism is a sector identified as a tradable sector when we discuss the economics that drives the local economy. And today we're going to hear from some of these communities about the importance of recreation to these local communities, about the work that they're doing to sustain and take care of the lands that all of these visitors are experiencing. But most importantly, we're really talking about a quality of life and a sustainable economy that can withstand and build resilience into the work that everyone is doing out there for our fuels reduction. So I want to let me start. We will introduce everybody as we go through the panel. And they've got their slides, and we will get started right now as I hand off the clicker.
Thank you. All right, Amy. Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Berry, CEO of the Tahoe Fund. It's so wonderful to welcome you all to Tahoe today. Sorry, it's a little chilly in here, but it's been gorgeous outside, so lovely to have you. The Tahoe Fund is a nonprofit. Our mission is to use the power of philanthropy to improve the Lake Tahoe environment for all to enjoy. So what does that mean, power of philanthropy? Well, we've raised a little over $25 million of private funds to help secure more than $160 million in public funding for more than 160 different environmental improvement projects in the last 13, 14 years. And what we really focus right now, I think for this panel, we have 5 focus areas. Forest health happens to be our #1 priority because we know if we allow this forest to burn down, the rest of our priority areas don't really matter. Transportation, no one's coming to Tahoe. Lake clarity, the lake is not going to be blue. Sustainable recreation, people aren't going to be on trails. And stewardship, it will be really hard to take care of a place that's seen catastrophic wildfire. So we're very focused on forest health, but sustainable recreation and stewardship mean an awful lot to us because we in Tahoe have a $5 billion economy. So we're a big slice of that chart that Dana just showed up there. We have a $5 billion tourism-based economy. We have about 40,000 people that live here, and on an annual basis, we see about 15 million visitor days a year. That's Yosemite and Yellowstone combined, if anyone is counting. So at a very small space, and you can see on this map, as you've heard all day today, it's really hard to get things done around here. We have 2 states, we have 5 counties, we have a city, we have 80% of land owned by the federal government, 10% private, 10% state, and we have a wonderful partnership with the Washoe Tribe of Nevada and California. So it's tricky to get things done around here, and when it comes to sustainable recreation, that's true as well. And so as Dana was talking earlier, everybody remembers COVID. It was kind of crazy. In California, you couldn't go to your park, you couldn't go to Disneyland, you couldn't go to the mall, but you know where you could come? Tahoe. And we saw trail counters that were higher in April of 2020 than they were in July of 2019. And we are a seasonal destination. Shoulder seasons are very quiet. You're lucky to be here right now. There's no one else really around. But July is usually the busiest time of year. And so it forced an interesting group of folks together for the first time ever, just kind of scratching our heads saying, how do we manage all these people that are here? And for the first time, we had land managers who are often talking together, and the business community that's often talking together at the same brand new table trying to figure out how we're going to manage all these people with regulations that seem to be changing on a dime. And after we sort of all took a breath, we got through the summer of 2020, we reconvened everybody to just understand how are we going to do this differently in the future, because COVID wasn't necessarily creating new issues, maybe it's shown a little spotlight on it, but we were trying to figure out how do we do things differently, right? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. And so we got together, hit the green button, and we looked at the trends that we were facing as a region. $4.5 billion in direct spending, 2 million unique visitors, which is actually, this says 17 million visitors days. Every time I look away, the number grows. A total economic impact of $10 billion, and nearby population growth of 26 to 28%. So that's Northern Nevada as well as Northern California. And we know with temperatures, the hotter it gets in the valley, the higher our visitation ends up in Tahoe. So we got everybody together to develop the first ever shared vision for what we want outdoor recreation and tourism to be in Tahoe. It had never existed before. I think the land manager, kind of joke that Tahoe was run like a giant resort where the sales and marketing team never got to talk to the operations team. So the sales and marketing folks are like, hey, come to Tahoe. And the land managers are like, where did all these people come from? And so we got everybody together at the same table. We developed a shared vision, which is not on this slide. I'll take you through the structure. But the shared vision is basically the 3 Ps. How do we make sure we take care of a thriving $5 billion economy while taking care of our local community while protecting our natural resources? And everything that we do should be with those 3 things in balance together. And it sounds very obvious, but we'd never taken the time to all sit down together and work that out. So out of that vision came a plan, not too dissimilar to the plan that Dana was talking about, the Destination Stewardship Plan. We all signed it. I think there were 14 or 15 partners a little over a year ago. And the most important thing to us all as we went through this exercise was that we didn't want a plan that just went on a shelf and nothing happened. So we designed a plan with very specific action items, and out of that grew this structure of how this new Destination Stewardship Council operates, which is really designed to execute the plan. So we have an executive committee, we hired a managing director, and then we created working groups for each of the pillars of the plan. So the one pillar was create governance to make sure this plan doesn't sit on a shelf. So that's pretty much what you're looking at here. One pillar is foster a tourism economy that gives back. We heard loud and clear from locals that they did not really appreciate living in an economy that was driven by tourism. There's definitely a sense of like, this is my trail. Why are all these people on my trail? But they don't appreciate how much happens in this basin because we live in a tourism-based economy. So really working on that in the blue pillar. The green pillar, advance a culture of caring for Tahoe. That's really about the stewardship side of it. How do we get everybody who lives, works, and plays in Tahoe to take better care of Tahoe when they're here? And then the purple pillar is improve the Tahoe experience for all. That's really like the infrastructure piece of this plan. How do we design different systems, either transit systems, trails, peak demand days? We don't have a busy day every day in Tahoe. We have maybe like 50 very busy days. And on those days, we're going to need more restrooms, and we're going to need more bathrooms, and we might need more shuttles. So the idea is, how do we put different groups into each of these pillars and come up with really strong actionable items, and then actually do something about it. And this last July 4th, I'm probably running out of time. This last July 4th was a great example. So we're talking about the forest all day today, but the reason people come to Tahoe is to be inside of this forest. And if we don't take care of the forest, we know that we're going to lose our economy and we're going to lose our community. And July 4th has been a really hot button for us as a region. People just flock to Tahoe on July 4th, and we're not always ready for it. And sometimes they leave some trash behind, and sometimes the media makes a really big deal out of it. So this year, now that we had this new structure in place, we all sort of held hands. I think there's over 20 partners now, and we said, we are going to make sure that July 5th this year does not look like July 5th the year before. And the headlines the year before were Tahoe's beaches trashed. The headline this year, thanks to this new structure and a lot of work by a lot of partners, was Tahoe's beaches shockingly clean on July 4th. So that's a lot to go over, and I know we have a lot more panelists, but thank you for allowing me to share you a little bit about Destination Stewardship Plan, and if you'd like to know more about how we set it up and what we're doing, I'd love to talk to you about it.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. The Destination Stewardship Plan that was created up here in the basin is actually serving as a model for many of our other rural communities and forested communities to think about how they, at the local level, are stewarding the lands themselves in partnership with the management agencies. But there's a key element to that also in integrating some educational opportunities to the visitors that are coming in so that they themselves become stewards of those lands. Therein lies Destination Stewardship Plan. And Tahoe really has set the bar very high because of the plan that they have put together. It's quite phenomenal. So thanks for that. I want to move next to a lead agency, Forest Health here in California. Stew McMorrow is the staff chief of the Wildfire Resilience for Cal Fire, and he helps support reforestation initiatives around the state itself. In addition to that day job, Stew has been the chair of this task force's reforestation and landowner assistance working groups. Stew and I had a chance to meet back in May when the Wildfire Task Force had a meeting up in Sacramento, and we were kind of thinking about the next iteration of this action plan. Stew and I, we both didn't really have another working group to join, so we created our own there in that meeting, and we identified a lot of shared interest, particularly between recreation and reforestation. So Stew, let me ask you this. In our conversations that we've had over time now, I've heard you say Healthy forests support healthy communities. From your perspective, what's the link between healthy forests and recreation? And as a follow-on to that, what do we need to do to help advance both at the same time?
All right. Thank you so much for having me to speak on this panel. It means a lot because recreation to me is a really big deal. And those of you that know me know that well. You almost can't help but know that about me because I'm always talking about it. And as a forester, I am probably the lone forester on this panel and at the table here as well. I became a forester because of my love for the environment, and I would venture to say that most of us probably developed some love for the environment because there was a trail going through it somehow, or you owned land and you had access to that land. And I think that's just so critically important when we're talking about forest management and the intersection between that and recreation. And when I sit here and talk about recreation, sometimes I think, are we talking about a prescription drug? Recreation, side effects may include good times and health, But it's true. We when we're out recreating in a forested environment, we're often enjoying that environment, and we value that environment based on what it means to us as humans. And community health is so incredibly tied to the environment around that community. I think since humans have been living on the planet, their health has been tied to the environment around them. We've already heard that this morning from Chairman Smokey, I think. And I really liked hearing that. I think that was great. But these forested communities, and I'm going to talk a lot about small, rural, forested communities such as the one on the picture here, which happens to be one of my happy places right now, Quincy, California. And they have experienced a lot of impact from their forest environment and the changes that have occurred there. As you all know, the Dixie Fire happened in that community in 2021. And the community suffers so much during a wildfire. And we talk a lot in this forum, especially with the Wildfire Resilience Task Force, around the work that we can do ahead of a fire to keep a fire from happening, and that is all so critically important. I'm going to talk a little bit today about reforestation and that restoration of those communities and those forests that sustain them. When these communities are impacted by a wildfire, right away they lose business immediately. People who, is somebody changing my slides for me?
Hit the green button.
No, but somebody already did.
Oh.
Thank you, whoever did that. Right away, they're losing business. People who work in the woods who are loggers, they right away can't go out into the woods and conduct their business. They're losing money. In communities like Quincy and so many others up and down the Sierras who rely on visitors who come to their community to recreate, and all the businesses that are associated with that, all of them suffer immediately. And you'll hear in the news, and of course, for very good reason, we focus on the human suffering and the community suffering, and I am not here to make light of that at all. It is terrible. I've been a firefighter for over 20 years, and I've experienced it myself. But we don't often talk about the after effects of the fire. We move on to the next fire. We hear sometimes about the recovery efforts, but it's that reforestation piece that's got to be talked about more. In natural cycles, sometimes after a disturbance, they try and return back to a semblance of what they were. And as climate change advances, these conditions are not the same as they were. These ecosystems are not returning back to exactly what they were. And in some cases, they're not recovering at all. And we have this fire vegetation feedback that happens. We have a fire comes through, wipes out trees, as you can see in this picture, and then a lot of brush and grass grows back. And that brush and grass grows back right around that community. And that community now is faced with even higher fire risk than they had before. And so we can use reforestation as a tool to help these communities not only recover economically, but help keep them safe. Reforestation in and of itself is a fuels management action. And so with regards to these working groups that we have within the task force and the strategies that we've come up with. We have also been able to develop some programs around restoring these communities quickly, or I should say the forests quickly. We developed a concept called emergency forest restoration teams, and we were able to successfully not only pilot them, but actually complete several of them in the last few years. And the concept is that we get in there right away, and we start assessing the damage, coming up with site preparation contracts, getting seedlings growing, and start getting forests replanted immediately in the wake of that wildfire. That helps these communities recover. These little seedlings are, the reforestation, as we all know, is air quality, water quality benefits, wildlife, carbon benefits. But these little seedlings are like little symbols of recovery, their hope for that community. And that plays directly into the recovery of the economy of that community. And recreation in these small communities is so critical, especially in the ones that are really beautiful. And my friends from the UC Extension reminded us all of a concept called solastalgia. And that is the emotional distress that people feel when their environment is changed in a negative way. And we need to help them recover that solace. And they get that by being able to go and recreate again in their environment. And so that's where I think this whole tie comes together, around the interplay between forest management and recreation. And I also want to point out that we have a number of strategies that have been drafted. And they are all able to come together in one way or another around the same goal. We have to remember that we talk a lot about the environment and the health of the environment, but what we're really talking about is us, our health. It's how we relate to that environment. The environment actually is pretty happy being blackberries in Arundo, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, look how quickly it wants to go to that sometimes, right? Nature probably doesn't care. It's us who care, and that's an important thing to remember. So we are actually implementing so many of these strategies right on top of each other right now. We have the recreation strategy being implemented with the reforestation strategy. We have the private landowner assistance work happening, and we have some really interesting concepts being put forward right now around this. And so you may be wondering, what is this Cal Fire guy doing talking about recreation, right? Because it is not what I do for a living with Cal Fire, but coming here to Tahoe for me is like coming home. I lived here for about 13 or 14 years, and I implemented forest management work all across the north shore of Lake Tahoe that time, and I was doing it right on top of recreational resources. And we found so many ways to find a way to keep that recreational resource open. A lot of times it was trail access points and things like that. And we're going in and running big, heavy equipment over these landscapes, and we have to be really careful about recognizing that these recreational resources are so critically important to this community, even well before a wildfire happens and we're just out there doing a fuels management project. I know of at least one that's going on right now. Well, it might not be a forest restoration project, but on the Corral Trail, it's closed a little bit sometimes, right? And that impacts people. And we have to remember that as forest managers, that's important. And so this slide here that you see is a concept that's being put forward to treat trails as de facto fuels management and fire management facilities on the landscape. We can actually build off of these things we can do prescribed burn off of our trail networks. We can recognize that they are actually something we should use within our community wildfire protection plans as a resource. So we're doing so much, and we know so much about what can be done. We have limited resources, but we have the tools, we have the know-how. We just have to make sure that we're doing this at a meaningful scale while we're recognizing the importance of recreation and the economies of these communities, while we're not only doing the upfront work before a fire happens and trying to keep the forest safe and our communities safe and intact, but we can also use these trails after the fact to help ourselves recover. So, thank you.
Thanks, Stu. There were a couple things that he pointed out that I want to note. Here we are in the basin. The local hospital, Barton is the local hospital. They were one of the first hospitals, I think, in the state, if not the country, to actually implement a prescribed recreation activity. They actually prescribe to patients as therapy and recovery getting out onto the basin here. That is an actual prescription that they write. And so thinking about that quality of life and that recovery and where recreation plays a role in that, here we are in the basin. The assets are used to help folks with their own personal recoveries. So in addition to the economic side of it, it does speak to the personal and quality of life. So thanks, Stu, for that reminder. I want to move to our next panelist. Again, very dear to my heart because it's a colleague from the Sierra Nevada Conservancy. So they are a state agency, as we know, that is supporting both healthy forests and sustainable recreation. Luke Hunt, who's joining us here today, he's the field operations manager for SNC. And as we noted earlier, SNC was a co-lead of this key working group that developed our joint strategy. I do want to take a moment to do a shout out. I think Matt Driscoll is in the room also. If I forgot to mention Matt from SNC, he was a partner in this working group. Angie was our co-lead, but Matt was a staff that from SNC that helped support it. So I want to note that. And then Luke is going to mention an initiative that's been launched here in California. And I'm going to call out Secretary Crowfoot for just a moment on this because he's going to reference California Jobs First. How many of you have heard California Jobs First? How many of you have been participating in the regional collaboratives that have been formed in your communities? Okay, we need more of you at that table. California Jobs First is an initiative to do just what it describes, generate jobs and grow California's economy. Secretary Crowfoot serves as a member of the joint council that has been formed by Governor Newsom to oversee the development of an operational plan for the state's economic development strategy. And so I want to give a shout out, and I think what's unique and interesting about that is that economic development may be perceived as living in one or two agencies, my agency, GoBiz, that seems to be natural. But here we are bringing together CNRA, CDFA, the veterans, the EPA. We've got, I'm going to forget the other 9, but here we are. The point is that economic development cuts across all of these agencies. And when we start to think about the impact of all the work that's being done out there and the jobs that are being created as a result of this, we're looking at about a $28 billion impact across about 190 programs across multiple state agencies. It is not anything to sneeze at, and CNRA is right in the middle of that with all of the work that you're all doing. It has an economic impact. So you're going to hear me continue to emphasize that today because it's important as well as taking care of and stewarding the natural resource, but there is an economic benefit to it as well. That's multi-benefit. Here we go. So let me introduce Luke Hunt. He's going to talk a little bit about what SNC is up to, but I want to specifically ask Luke, you have SNC has its strategy. So can we talk about how you've integrated sustainable recreation into your strategic plan, and how is the joint strategy that was developed here informing SNC's key initiatives that you've got underway around your healthy forest work?
Yeah, thanks, Dana. This plan is a great follow-on to our multi-benefit discussion that we had in the last panel. And what SNC is most excited about is that this is a joint strategy that links recreation and wildfire resilience from early in the planning phases through implementation to project maintenance. And it's really a push to work in a way that improves multiple elements of a landscape simultaneously. And one example of how this has worked in the past is the way the Forest Service has worked on priority watersheds. And the way that has happened is early in the planning phases, forest leadership identifies a watershed where it's possible for concerted investment to move the needle on a bunch of fronts. So clean water, recreation, roads, forest health. It's It's integrated, and it's more than just a once and done approach that might focus on how efficiencies might work together during implementation. At its best, these joint strategies are really holistic planning, where projects can be designed to work together in a synergistic way from the very beginning. The priority watershed example on Forest Service lands is in some ways simpler than this joint strategy because the Forest Service is a single land manager and oftentimes a single funder. And what SNC is trying to do to help and to implement the joint strategy is by building capacity and coordinating funding from multiple sources. And I'll get to that in a little bit. But these are the 4 goals of the joint strategy. The vision is for recreation that's sustainable, inclusive, integrated with forest and watershed management, and that delivers social, environmental, and economic benefits. And that's pretty close to SNC's mission. And Dennis, I wanted to talk a little bit about jobs first, too. So the joint strategy, it's tightly aligned with SNC's strategic plan and California's Jobs First initiative for our region, because all of these efforts see forest health as foundational to sustainable recreation, to resilient communities, and to thriving economies. So these are the examples from the draft regional strategic plans under California's Jobs First initiative, and this is where they overlap with SNC's strategic priorities: sustainable recreation, holistic forest and watershed management, public land access, workforce and business development, capacity investment, and SNC has provided technical assistance and grants supporting all of these strategies. And Michelle and John lead some very impactful multi-benefit programs where SNC was able to invest early, providing the first public planning dollars. So you've heard SNC talk about the landscape investment strategy at other task force meetings, but we haven't yet talked about recreation. And at the bottom, if you've seen the landscape strategy, you'll see that I put the implementation side of this is from Sierra Butte Trail Stewardship. And what this landscape investment strategy is it's SNC's effort to align multiple funding streams. And it's built around this idea of ready landscapes, where there's capacity to work together over multiple years to, again, move the needle on a number of fronts. The key metric of a ready landscape is a project portfolio that's been prioritized by a collaborative representing diverse interests. One example from just over the hill is the Healthy El Dorado Landscape Partnership. It's the first funding. SNC helped coordinate some of the first funding with Cal Fire. It came in a number of flavors. Cal Fire from the forestry side, the Wildlife Conservation Board for meadows and habitat. SNC provided recreation funding, and Forest Service funding came through a stewardship contract with SNC, and also, like we talked about at the last task force meeting, through SNC's Good Neighbor Authority. As a pilot program, it's imperfect, but I think it points in the right direction, and it highlights 2 areas where we can all do better next time. First, the recreation projects that SNC funded could be integrated earlier in their development so that the joint strategy goals work better together. Second, we could improve by having fewer agreements to manage, so better funding coordination early on in the process. What I think is already working perfectly is the incredible people in Healthy El Dorado and in other ready landscapes like around the town of Mammoth. And I think the big win that I see and that we've talked about over and over at this meeting and other task force meetings, the big win is coordinated funding that supports recreation, local economies, and forest and watershed health. And the 3 strategies that we talked about, the joint strategy, the California Jobs First initiative for our region, and the SNC strategic plan all point towards that big win. And this has been a plan-heavy discussion. So if I could boil it down into a single request, it would be for 3 parts: predictable, coordinated, multi-benefit funding at a level that makes a difference. And I framed this as an ask, but We've heard this in the last panel. We've been hearing this over and over, that predicted, coordinated, multi-benefit funding is something that we're all pushing towards. And it is so inspiring to hear some of the progress that the task force is making pushing this.
Luke, thank you. That three-part ask, I think, is extremely important. And I want to also, as we transition to the next two panelists, acknowledge that this work is being done at a local level in many cases. And this falls sometimes disproportionately on many of our smaller and rural and forested communities for them to engage and help support this work. And we've got, in many cases, lightly populated communities that are taking on these responsibilities, and that's what we refer to as disproportionate. It would be great if there were, 50,000 Michelle Abramsons out there to help get this work done, but we don't have it. So this is where we really do start to rely on partnerships and to get this work done. So we've talked a little bit about plans. We want to move into some practitioners who are actually on the ground doing some implementation. And we want to start first with Michelle Abramson here. She is the Connected Communities, and I'm going to ask everybody who's been tracking the Connected Communities project. Yeah, okay. That's one you want to start to engage with and follow as well, because it's extremely, extremely cool, and can't wait to be on it. Anyway, Michelle is the Connected Communities project manager for the Sierra Buttes Trail Stewardship. Many of you met Greg Williams, and many of you probably work with Greg Williams. He was here back in 22 and did a presentation to this task force. Michelle is a member of that incredible SBTS team up there, and we're thrilled to have her. As Stew mentioned, her community that she resides in is still recovering from the Dixie Fire 3 years later. These fires do have significant impacts on our communities. I also want to note that the Sierra Buttes Trail Stewardship, it was created out of a desire to sustain a quality lifestyle in the Lost Sierra. And it resides itself at the intersection of community economic resilience and healthy forests. And that's a pretty key vision, if you will, for what SBTS does. So Michelle, let's ask this question of you. Your organization has helped develop hundreds of miles throughout the Lost Sierra, and that has helped support economic growth and job development there in the region. You've also experienced catastrophic wildfire events that have impacted the trails work that you previously completed. Let's share with the group how SBTS, or Sierra Buttes Trail Stewardship, how you're helping lead the regional recovery efforts through trail restoration work, and how you're integrating trail work into ongoing healthy forest work.
Thank you, Dina, for that great introduction, although the idea of 50,000 Michelle Abramsons is a little bit terrifying, especially to my husband, I'm sure. I didn't see enough hands going up when they talked about connected communities, so I want to take a second and introduce Sierra Buttes Trail Stewardship if there's anyone out there who doesn't know about us. You might have heard of we have some big events in the area, the Lost and Found, or the Downeyville Classic. So you definitely have to attend those. Those are a blast. I heard partnership a lot mentioned in these panels, so I think I kind of want to start there. The Sierra Buttes started over 20 years ago when the Forest Service lost capacity to maintain some of the trails. And Greg Williams, our founder, the guy with the big beard, he knows the value of trails and how they have economic and community value. He owned a bike shop, so he saw the economic value they have. And he grew up there getting lost on those trails and exploring the area, so he saw the value in the community. And he, through help with SNC, as Luke mentioned earlier, he kind of started this Connected Communities project, which borrows or has a lot of the same ideas that have been brought up about multi-benefit trail corridors, how these things can be so integrated to other aspects, the economic values that Dana brought up earlier. It's honestly the Joint Strategy Task Force. It's a lot like reading our Trails Master Plan, which is the part that was funded by SNC, which is now online, and it is a super fun read if you guys would like to check it out. So that's where he started, the economic value of trails and how they could revitalize these mountain communities. Oh, I had to start. So the area we serve is the Lost Sierra. It's a colloquial term. It's kind of a broad definition of an area a couple hours north of Tahoe. It includes Plumas and Lassen and Sierra counties. Recently, the Lost Sierra has been brought up a couple times, suffered the Dixie Fire. I do want to note that that was on the back of 2 other previous years of large wildfires. That was 3 years in a row where a lot of people were evacuated from their homes. But the Dixie Fire was obviously the biggest, started in 2021, and it quickly took over the Lost Sierra, burned 70% of the Plumas National Forest. It burned through the community of Greenville. It burned down 550 homes that families lived in, burnt down the best pizza place in the county, just absolute destruction. It also burnt down a lot of our trails. So not only did it burn down a lot of the trails, I also want to point out that the firefighting efforts bulldozed some of our trails. And then you had quite a few of our trails get burned over, including some of our most popular trails, like the Mount Huff Trail and the Indian Falls Ridge Trail got burned over. And it takes a lot of work. Trail maintenance on trails that have been burned over by fire, it's like an absolute war. It's been 3 years, and this pictures are from this summer. We had a trail that's burned 3 years ago from the Dixie Fire. We went out we thought it was going to be a couple trees down. It ended up being 84 trees that were downed. We had to clear them off of 6 miles of trails. So trail maintenance is just so much harder, and the funding is also drying up as well. Even our Forest Service partners are struggling to get the capacity to help us maintain these trails, and so it's almost like it's 20 years ago where we're facing trail closure and losing this public access to trails. So I guess I do want to point out that during the fire, Stu kind of pointed out, there's nothing that we can do. Most of us as a community, we kind of just have to sit and wait. It's such a nerve. I'm sure most people in this room have been evacuated before or been affected, have had families that have been affected by fire. And it's just this horrible feeling where you just can't do anything and you're kind of at a loss. So it was after the fire that we kind of asked ourselves, well, how do we not put ourselves in that place again? What can we do right now to restore some of the destruction that we saw from the fire, and what can we do to protect our trails? The restoration, there's kind of 2 parts. You got the restoration of the trails that I kind of mentioned earlier, all that work on trail maintenance, bringing it back from bulldozed to single-track trail, making it something that is an enjoyable experience for everybody. And then you also got the restoration of communities, and Stu kind of hit on this a little bit, but yeah, the community is devastated after. I mean, the population in Greenville is like about half of what it was 10 years ago. You have businesses that are just starting to pop up again and just rebuilding, but they're also facing just a huge mountain of struggles that come after a fire, the things that people might not think about, the mudslides, the landslides, the trying to get your payout from the insurance companies or PG&E, whoever it is, trying to get and afford fire insurance now because it's even higher and higher, and sometimes really hard to find. These are all things that make it harder. So restoration of a community, and that really gets at, what trails can do to that is kind of what Dana mentioned earlier, is that economic factor, bringing back an economic resource into these towns. We have a project going on, and it's another partnership one. We have it with the Plumas National Forest and Sierra Institute. We are trying to build a trail system around Greenville that we can start on right now. That would be that instant, hey, community, I know it's hard. You're still looking at a landscape that looks post-apocalyptic, but you can get back on these trails. You can get back to the access to the public lands that surround you. And the other side of it is protect, and I think really the forester and the fire people can speak much better to this, and I'm just a trails person, so I don't have that expertise. But we do, Sierra Buttes does have Fire Hardened Trails as part of our plan to our vision of future trails. It's something that we kind of go into much more detail in our Trails Master Plan. So I definitely encourage you guys to check that out online. I think the thing that I want to hit at the most, because we're talking about a lot about multi-benefit trail corridors, and we're using all these big words. I think I kind of want to hit something that Stew brought up in the beginning, is what kind of makes trails unique. And that's really the fact that they're fun. I mean, this is the recreation panel, so recreation is just another fancy word for fun. And I agree with you, Stew. That's how I got into stewardship and natural resources. Was I was on trails and I saw the value in it. And now I'm here at this conference that I've been at all day, listening to people talk about forest resilience and healthy forests, all these big words. So I really think trails bridge that gap between people who are willing to pay money and sit at this conference for 8 hours a day and people who just want to get out on trails and enjoy the forest that surrounds them.
Michelle, thank you for that. I want to point out in the joint strategy that was developed by the key working group, there are middle, and post-fire key recommendations in there. One of the things that Michelle has hit on that I think is extremely important, and I know we keep it top of mind, but I think it's really something to lean into. These communities who are surrounded by these forested lands and are in these rural areas, and that they're the ones that are experiencing these fires, the sooner that we can move into that recovery effort, the sooner that we can collaborate on the communication that we have out to those who have been wanting to come and visit, the sooner that we can get that coordinated and going, the sooner these communities can start to recover themselves. And there are some key actions in this joint strategy that talk about the coordination and the desire for communication to be improved and how we talk about these fire-impacted areas in maybe a different manner. So if you haven't had a chance to review the joint strategy, I would encourage you to do so, because there's some very practical steps that we heard from communities that have been impacted. So, Michelle, I want to point that out. And 3 years is a long time, and hopefully we get it going, sooner. I'm going to transition over to another colleague, John Wentworth. He is the founder and CEO of Mammoth Lakes Trails and Public Access. As noted earlier, MLTPA was the sponsor and the convener for the early version, CalRec Vision, that led us into this joint strategy that was developed for the task force. He has been at MLTPA since 2005. I have known John since 2005 because I happen to be the tourism and recreation director for the town of Mammoth Lakes, and that was a collision that happened in Mammoth Lakes. I will tell you that. It has changed Mammoth, and it has changed the way Mammoth approaches its recreation infrastructure and the value that it places on recreation there in the community itself. I want to note that John continues to push for the implementation of these key actions in these joint strategies, and he is on the ground very actively engaged in a variety of initiatives there in the Eastern Sierra. So John, here's my question for you. What are some examples of the healthy forest work that you're currently engaged with that are implementing key actions from the joint strategy, and what initiatives have you seen launched to help inform this implementation playbook that we want to start moving in towards to help implement these actions out of that joint strategy?
Thank you, Dana. You'll have to forgive me, as some of us were at the California Forward Economic Summit yesterday, and the governor came and had a nice dialogue with your boss, I guess, Dee Dee Myers. And so we're going to touch on jobs first a little bit in this conversation. It is deeply baked into the governor's mind, which is quite an inspiring thing to see and to hear. And partners, there's a saying about there's no atheists in a foxhole. Well, there's no silos when you're on the ground implementing things. So in terms of our partners, we're all in this together. And I would like to illustrate a little bit as we talk about the situation on the Eastern Sierra. We're in the regional wildfire threat business. Michelle has talked very eloquently about the recovery side of it. We're in the threat side. It hasn't gotten to us yet, but we're getting ready. We are very fortunate in the Eastern Sierra to have an NGO, a nonprofit known as the White Bark Institute. and some of you are familiar with their Eastern Sierra Climate and Communities Resilience Project, which just had a recent decision from the Forest Service to treat about 58,000 acres in Mammoth Lakes and Mono County. That EA decision just came out recently. So far, they've already treated about 5,000 acres to date, with a number of those acres scheduled to move this thing forward. So I called up my friends and fellow recreationists at the White Bark Institute and said, look, we got this joint strategy. It's not clear who owns this thing and who's implementing it, but could you take a look at it and just let us know how many things you're already getting done or that you're working on, maybe 2 or 3? And they got back to me quite quickly, and they said, well, look, we're working on 22 of the 31 key actions, just as part of their work. Good to know. So we then started to embark upon this process of really integrating the recreation values that are in the strategy in with the great work that White Bark is doing on the ground. The work is underway. They've millions of dollars of grants from Cal Fire, from the Forest Service, and other places. This is a hotshot NGO. If you don't know about them, you need to check them out. They know what they're doing, and they're passionate, and they're getting things done. And the particular recreation assets in Mammoth Lakes are defined through the Mammoth Lakes Trail System. There are dozens and dozens of trails. There are hundreds of campsites, and there's key federal infrastructure, visitor centers, other things that, should a wildfire come through this community, Michelle and I would be in the same boat. And I love Michelle, but I don't want to get into that boat. So we are out there on the ground, and the tool that we use, Esri, GIS data, it's the common data thread that makes it possible to really effectively and efficiently do this work. Some of you may not know the names of these places, but our visitor audience that makes our economy possible, these places mean something to them. Inyo Craters, the Lakes Basin, all the buildings within the urban growth boundary compels visitation to our community, makes it possible. The map on the left there, that's the GIS product coming out of White Bark. This is the common way that we can efficiently and effectively be implementing the strategy, which brings us to data. The presentation this morning, is Dr. Battles out there anywhere? There he is right there. How are you? Good to see you. Amazing work that's happening in the data space. Now, I wish that I could be showing you the nice little dashboard that the task force has put together. It's unbelievable. All I can do is provide a snapshot of an inference of all the recreation assets in the state of California. I can't really fit it into a screen. Fortunately, we've got a proposal in to Mr. Patrick Wright and the task force for a modest sum to be able to put together an inventory of all the recreation assets in the state of California to get them into those regional resource kits. So that when the great work, the great grants are being provided to do the work on the ground, where Michelle's recreation assets are, where our recreation assets are, they are known. They are knowable. Not that hard to do, but that would be a great step forward if we could pull off something like that. Educate. Educate. I'm channeling my inner governor right now. I know it's a sad show, but educate. Sierra Nevada Conservancy invested in our region several years ago through the Sustainable Recreation and Tourism Initiative, and we assembled all the DMOs, all the people that have connections to our audience. And we've come back to leverage them to be able to put together, social media stuff. Again, this is all volunteered at this point. We were able to get a modest sort of a sub-agreement with White Bark to get these things on the ground to start getting the word out to our audience. Well, let's talk about scale a little bit. There are 30,000 permanent residents in Alpine, Mono, and Inyo County, 7 million visitors. And rumor has it some of them start fires, right? I don't know. This is the scale that we're talking about in rural California. Millions and millions of people from around the world, from all over California, they're voters, let's not forget that. Public lands need public support. They come to these places for the reasons that Michelle talked about. It's fun, it's rejuvenating, it's essential to the human spirit. We need to be communicating with them. There's excellent tasks, key actions in this strategy to take this statewide. These are things that can be done. And finally, rural economies. This is important. California Jobs First. In our region, we're in the Eastern Sierra region, and the basic way to look at this is the activity of recreation, which runs the gamut from a clear night sky, where you can see the stars, to hiking, the PCT, doing all these different types of things. That activity drives rural economies. As Dana mentioned earlier, it's measured by BEA, it's measured by tourism, which the governor pointed out the key role that the tourism sector played in this year's budget for the state. It's a key driver. But recreation is the activity that compels that financial stuff that's measured through tourism. And in our region, we've completed, thanks to the Sierra Business Council and others, the strategic plan for our region. Sustainable recreation and tourism is at the top of the list. It is the sector. This is a region that's about 80–90% managed by the federal government. That's what we do out there. There was a parallel effort going on of interest that came out of the pandemic, that came out of the federal government to about a $5 million grant went to the state of California to update the regional tourism strategic plans. This was kind of puzzling just because the way that Visit California looks at regions in the state is it's not completely different, but it doesn't align with the regions coming out of California Jobs First. But okay, interesting effort. Let's see what they come up with. And it was puzzling for a while until last week when Visit California published a map that shows Visit California's regions and California Jobs First regions coming together. There's convergence happening around the tourism activity and the recreation activity and the economic activity. Very interesting. This just came out last week. And this points a little bit to the kind of a key role that some of the agencies could play to coordinate where across the state in the 13 regions of California Jobs First is recreation and tourism rising to the top. How can we start aggregating, getting like-minded folks together to start bringing these things together? That's an interesting opportunity. Because Visit California is a powerhouse, and tourism, as Dan has mentioned in California, is it is a fundamental driving part of the entire statewide economy. It's about $150 billion last year that was generated through tourism. And in the Natural Resources Agency, the Outdoors for All is a critical policy document. We heard it mentioned earlier. What role does it play in all this? It clearly and explicitly expresses California values, the values of how human beings should be interfacing with these landscapes through tourism, through recreation. It's a beautiful North Star that can guide across the vast expanses of the state. Finally, the work that the task force has been working on, these are just a couple of examples from the Forest Service, landscape scale wildfire work, also from S&C, landscape scale wildfire work statewide. But there's this strategic convergence that's happening between the work that the task force is doing and the work that's coming out of Visit California and the work that's coming more significantly out of California Jobs First. This is the great opportunity that we have at this point. The task force is doing unbelievable work. I mean, the data work, the things we've seen today are inspiring. They're kind of awe-inspiring. But now, rural communities, human beings, integrating them into this matrix, the opportunity is right now in front of us. Yeah. So, thank you.
Thank you, John. I'd like to thank the panel. I think we're up against time, so I'd like to thank the panel and turn it over to our executive committee of the task force for any questions that you have of this panel. And these are the folks that are on the ground doing the work. So we'd like to turn it over to you for any questions you might have.
Yeah, huge thanks. This is a great panel. I'm feeling your energy. I'm with Michelle. Recreation is fun, and a lot funner than wildfire threat reduction. But in all honesty, I mean, I do think it speaks to our California values, and I do think it is a great uniter. You know, whether you're urban or rural or red or blue or north or south, I mean, everyone loves the outdoors and recreates in different ways. And so I think we have a tremendous opportunity to link recreation and rural economic, or just generally economic development with our wildfire resilience. You know, we've spent between the federal and state government about $5 billion on these projects we've been talking about all day in the last few years. And I don't get a sense, if I'm being honest, that we're really leveraging that money to advance recreation. Like, I'm so fired up for connected communities. I love the idea of fire hardened trails, but I feel like the problem, you know, sort of you guys have done such a good job of identifying the opportunity. But I guess, John, because you always tell it like it is, like, what do we need to be doing that we're not doing to actually achieve this vision among all of our wildfire-related agencies?
You're asking me?
Sure. Or anybody else for that matter.
No,
I just know
that's okay.
you'll keep it interesting.
That's okay. I'll just kick it off. A place to start would be ownership, not only of this strategy, but the strategies you're going to produce in the future. As Dana mentioned, it gets done, it's a nice piece of work. Okay, is a state, I mean, who do the practitioners go to say, well, what do we do next? How do we support this thing? And then maybe taking these strategies and integrating them into grant opportunities, getting it in there. So if you're doing things that are coming out of not this strategy, but any strategy, you get 10 points, you get 15 points, those kinds of things. I think also this convergence that I mentioned, I mean, the California Jobs First, Dana mentioned you're serving on this council. How do we start really bringing all these different sectors together so that we can get things done, actively done on the ground? The thing that's a little unnerving is that the task force and the work that you're doing, you've built this powerful machine that's going to do, these forest treatments are going to happen. We can't let things get left behind. We got to bring the rural communities along. We got to bring the visiting audience along. The interpretive opportunities are profound. Again, these are voters. I mean, these are people that need to be supporting public lands and need to be supporting the work that's being done. So I think clear ownership is important. I think within the CNRA, within your agency, Outdoors for All, linking these things together and helping us understand where the convergence is, leveraging capacity. The recreation audience is millions of people. I mean, there's thousands that you could turn into a workforce tomorrow. If we take this strategy with a certain kind of guidance and parameters on it, we could leverage thousands of people across the state to start going out and implementing these things in communities that are affected by wildfire, where recreation is their bread and butter. You'd have a workforce tomorrow. That's an opportunity.
Let me ask a follow-up question on that, and I'll point to you, Stu. You made an eloquent, pitch for when we're restoring forests, we need to restore trails and recreation facilities. Can we do that, given the fact that, can your reforestation dollars go to that? How do we, where do you find the money, literally?
That's what I was going to say, Patrick. I mean, it's funding. There is not a bucket of funding for recreation that's easily accessible. I think we need to think about this on the long tail way, right? The way that you fall in love with a forest is going on a trail and walking or riding your bike through a forest. You have an out-of-body experience, your endorphins come in, your oxytocins, I think the Japanese have a word for it, forest bathing. Mm-hmm. The more people we can get on trails in our forests, they're going to care about taking care of our forests. And when it comes to funding initiatives, they'll be in support of it. When it comes to, the hardest thing for people to get around is we have too many trees in our forest. We need to reduce the amount of trees. And if we can get champions of the forest, take advantage of those champions through recreation, we can start to tell that story. You love hiking here. You don't want this to burn down. We need to lose some trees. And then all of a sudden, it shifts the whole narrative, and you have a whole army of people who are out there saying, we have too many trees in our forest. Let's cut trees down. Obviously in a very scientific and a good way. We're not talking clear-cutting. Ecologically based. But I think that's what we missed out on. And, as a funder in Tahoe, I see Drew Bray here from Tamba. So many times you rely on nonprofits to build trails. And they're there for it. But if there was a nice chunk of money from the federal and the state agencies, you could do amazing things for trails and use it as an educational experience for folks.
I'd like to add that, California has lost, I've seen some estimates where we've lost 30% of our forest cover in the last 20 years. And I think we need to recognize that reforestation is an emergency. It's an emergency not like fighting a wildfire, but it's a longer-term emergency. And if we're not thinking about getting after it as quickly as we can in this partnership team approach right away, we're not going to have forests for our future generations to work on. And so I hate to always answer that question with money, right? And it's not always all about money, but it's recognition of the problem. It's a lot like, we've all heard that analogy, you put a frog in tepid water and you slowly heat it up and it eventually will get boiled to death. I see that in my hot tub sometimes. But it's true. And so with the reforestation strategy and the working group that we had, one of the things that we put together was a reforestation pipeline partnership. And it cost a little bit of money to bring everybody together. Okay, but that wasn't really the power of that partnership. And that partnership is just now coming to fruition right now. We brought together every entity that we could think of in the state who has a vested interest in reforestation, from the private industrial partners, private non-industrial, Forest Service, you name it. And I'm skipping, pardon me, folks, if I'm skipping who you are in that partnership. And we brought it together to look at these problems and how do we address them in with limited resources. And the first year or so was sort of this building up, and we started to think, well, what are we really getting out of this, right? And then we started to develop these huddles with our partners from American Forests. Really helped us start to identify where are these pinch points in the pipeline partnership, in the pipeline. And out of those huddles, we developed solutions to get together, right? And this particular year, we really saw so many of these initiatives that we put together, just sharing resources, right? Yeah, we all have limited resources, but if we pool them together, we can really get something done. And I'm reminded of this tagline from the task force right here, all together now. It's exactly what we're doing under reforestation. So yes, we need money, but we need a recognition of the problem. And this emergency forest restoration team concept that we've put together, it's working. And I don't want to call recreation a byproduct. That's not fair. But my point is, the more that we can get out ahead of this problem after fires, the more we can help everybody together. I hope I answered your question.
Maybe a couple more people, then we have Don.
Yeah, I would like to jump in and say one thing that the task force has done an amazing job at is getting all the agencies to work together, like we heard, measure things in a common way, communicate in a common way. And I think recreation, this joint strategy, that could be another way that the task force could help get funders to communicate in a way that could be communicated in a cohesive story. So I think like public health, these things that cross straight over to smoke and wildfires, it seems like these are some metrics that through the joint strategy you could set some goals, like communicate statewide goals that then groups like the SNC can say, we're building down from these statewide goals, and this is how our initiatives fit towards moving the needle towards what the task force has defined.
I like that.
Yeah, I want to say something too. Obviously, if you bring up barriers to a bunch of people trying to implement stuff, everyone's getting pretty worked up about it. But I like to add on to what John said a little bit. We have thousands of people who volunteer with us every year. I mean, part of that's because we bribe them with beer, but they're out there, they're doing the hard work with us. And then to also mention what Amy mentioned about funding, obviously that's huge. But I think a huge part of that too is kind of where we could avoid spending money in other places, and that's that green tape aspect that we brought up on the last panel. You brought up NEPA and CEQA, but I would just like to say we've had multiple trails projects that we've lost, S&C ones that we've lost, or money has to be redirected to getting not just NEPA and CEQA, but 401, 404 permits, the 1600 permit, the SWPP, the OPP, all of these other permits that different agencies have the right to ask us to do, and I understand the purpose behind them, but it just seems like we're doing the same work across different agencies, both federal and state. So.
True. John, real quick.
Yeah. Fund the data piece.
There's a proposal on that to Patrick. Is that true?
Yeah, it's that guy over there. Fund that. The role of CNRA to coordinate and incentivize implementation along the lines you're talking about. Get it into the grant application to do that kind of stuff. One thing I left out, but I want to make sure that we sort of appreciate, is the scale of the wildfire crisis in recreation ski areas. If Mammoth Mountain burns, if the main lodge burns down, if the town burns down, the economy of the Eastern Sierra goes up with it. So the scale of recreation assets to be considered is the full gamut. I just wanted to make sure I got that in there.
Really good point. Don, last question.
Yeah, I'm watching the clock wind down in the opposite direction right now. I'm going to make it more of a point for us to think about, and that is to first think about how trails have historically played an important role in the way that fire has been part of these landscapes. from indigenous fire stewardship to the way that roads currently serve and bringing fire, not necessarily in a beneficial way, to our landscapes. John, in your map that you showed of Mammoth area, I saw all these trails, and all I could imagine was 100 different burn units that were within that. So my point is that how do we, one, think about how we can use recreation to scale fire back into the landscape, but then also how beneficial fire can be part of how recreation is within the landscape? And I'll leave it with
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
I love it, and that speaks to the convergence. Although since Michelle brought up beer, I've been thinking about beer. And I understand that we have a reception that we're pretty close to. So I want to ask you to join me in thanking our panel. And as we close it out, I'll just ask you to stay here with us on the dais. So we are at the end of a really productive day from where I sit anyway, and I just want to ask for any hot takes from our executive committee about today. I thought it was a really energizing day. I loved this morning understanding tangibly the progress we've made together over the last few years. It's incredibly impressive, and frankly, if you would have asked me if we would have achieved that amount of activity 3 years ago, I would have never believed that we could. And we're gaining momentum. So it's huge validation to the work that you are doing across the regions. And then this afternoon, and then of course here in Tahoe, I'm always inspired by the work that's happening here and the proof point of the Caldor fire. And then this afternoon, about the potential that we have to take this focus, this priority on wildfire resilience and achieve so much more. Including protecting this world-renowned biodiversity and nature that we have, and expanding outdoor opportunities and in maintaining those outdoor opportunities. I think the potential of what we can do on this task force beyond just wildfire is really, really high, and I want to focus in coming months on how we actually achieve that potential. So those are my thoughts. Others, Supervisor.
Real quick, just. One of the important things that I learned out of this is how important tourism is to the National Forest, which is the biggest user. I think I got that from Randy Moore. The other thing I liked was that little map about the trail, about expanding that. That's my takeaway that I want to implement back in Siskiyou County. So again, this has always been a learning experience. I just appreciate all this goes on here.
Yeah, thank you so much. Doug.
I really appreciated the tour to the mill. I guess, Downer Doug here, that's not California jobs, that's not tax revenue. All that equipment there, if that was in my county, that would be taxed. We'd be getting revenue. So I think a vibrant forest products industry needs to be a priority. And then we can use, thank you, then we can use the grants and tax dollars for recreation projects. So my 2 cents, but a great conference. Thank you very much.
And I'll just say, big missing piece of the puzzle is getting that forest products sector working back again, because we don't have the public funding. I don't care what the federal or state budget surplus could look like to do the work that we need to do. We need to help these companies succeed on ecologically based projects. So I'm with you.
Just quickly, this has been such an incredible day, and I'm so happy to have been able to sit here. And one takeaway for me is predictable, coordinated, multi-benefit funding that makes a difference. So thank you, Luke, for that, walking away with that. And I'm just glad we ended on implementation and people, and really thinking about that and how we communicate all of it. There's been so many conversations on strategy and plans and all of it, but thinking about the communication aspect too on the ground in the communities is really important.
Yes.
In research, I think we often will tease apart pieces to really dive deep into how certain elements work. But we also realize and always make the case that we have to think about everything together to have meaning. And so I just love the thread of the conversations. It really is weaving everything together, which is really the ultimate goal. So really appreciated that.
Patrick.
I just want to, before you wrap up, thank a couple people. First, all of you for coming. Wade made a comment to me at lunch that and I think it's true, there are far more people here that are not from Tahoe than from Tahoe. And I think that's because of the community throughout the state that is slowly building. And we want to build on that because it is all about what you're achieving, not what we're achieving. Secondly, I want to just thank, of course, all the panelists that participated today. Sorry for putting you through the rigors of more than one dry run, but the polish of the presentations today by everybody, the graphics, the presentations were first rate. Thank you for that. And then I can't thank enough our small team led by Forrest Schaefer, who organized all the panels, and Kristen and Michelle. Putting on something of this magnitude is no mean feat. So thank you all.
Yeah, and while we're in the thank you category, I just wanted to name the remainder of the sponsors. For those of you who have been able to look behind you, we have a lot of the logos up right now, but by name, I want to thank the California Mountain Biking Coalition, Tooth Sued Forestry Services, UC San Diego's Burn Pro 3D, American Forests, Ember Defense, Liberties Utility, the National Forest Foundation, WSP, WRA Environmental Consultants, and Vibrant Planet. Let's give them a round of applause. I mean, to me, we have public agencies, we have conservation organizations, we have for-profit tech companies. I mean, it really speaks to the diversity of participants we have in the task force. And again, thank you to Tahoe Fund and Tahoe Conservancy for anchoring the hosting. A few final notes. We were joined by several hundred people virtually today, so for those, we've been directing a lot of our comments to those in the room, but thank you to those who joined us online. And again, an invitation to sign up for reminders, the newsletter, the listserv. I mean, this is really an inclusive task force. If we can convey nothing else, it's really about supporting regional and local leadership. So the more that you can engage and leverage us, the better off we'll all be. Tomorrow there are some very compelling field tours, and those of you who have signed up, we just want to announce that each tour offers 2 pickup locations, departing on the dot at 8:45 and 9 a.m. tomorrow. So please check the tour details in your email to ensure that you have the correct time and location. We've got a lot of interest. I think some of those are quote-unquote sold-out tours or at maximum capacity. We also have members of the media joining those tours, so hopefully we'll get some good press coverage on that. And then lastly, if this is the last thing I'll say, please join us for an on-site reception, probably through those doors, probably including some cold or warm drinks. And once again, huge thanks to you all for attending.
You've been listening to Dirt Magic, the podcast, brought to you by the good people of the Sierra Buttes Trail Stewardship. For future and past shows, visit dirtmagicpodcast.com or search for us on your favorite listening platform. Music by The Saddle Tramps. To learn more about supporting the SBTS and upcoming events, visit sierratrails.org. I'm Martin Scheel, and I'll see you out on the trails. Thanks again for listening.